$10 billion of new roads is not a major package when it's funded through cuts to existing projects, which will also be in tonight's budget. To them I say, that's not a package, this is a package. This is the list of $20 billion of new projects that was in the 2013 budget brought down by the federal Labor government. What we've seen from the coalition since they were elected is re-announcing Labor project after Labor project. Sometimes they've re-announced them with a new name. For example, the F3 to M2, $405 million that was included in last year's budget led to a memorandum of understanding being signed between the Commonwealth and the New South Wales government in June. The funding commenced in June last year, and yet they came in and said, well, this is a new announcement, whereas what they had was just a new name of NorthConnex for an existing project. What we will see tonight is cuts for every public transport project that is not under contract but is fully budgeted for. Projects like the Cross River Rail project in Brisbane, the Melbourne Metro project in Melbourne, the Adelaide Tonsley Park Rail project. In Perth, the light rail project, as well as the project of heavy rail to the airport. What that means is that this is a government that doesn't understand you need to both build road and rail in order to deal with urban congestion. Then on top of that, they'll say that they've got this new fund of $5 billion for private sector investment. What they'll ignore is that last year we had in the budget the infrastructure investment tax incentive that was worked out in a coherent way after consultation with the private sector that provides an incentive for investment from the private sector into infrastructure projects of projects valued at up to $25 billion. That's already in the budget. So we'll see what they have in terms of whether they continue with that. But this is a government that is attempting to say that its infrastructure package justifies the cuts that we're going to see in tonight's budget. Cuts to pensions, cuts to Medicare so that every time people visit a doctor, they will have to pay a fee. Last year, we produced $20 billion of new infrastructure projects without making cuts to existing projects and, importantly, without imposing a new higher tax on petrol that will impact on working families every time they fill up at the Bowser. This is a budget of broken promises that will impact on living standards and impact on the most vulnerable. This is a government that hasn't been prepared to go after the big end of town. This is a government that is prepared to impose all of its prejudices, whether they be against working Australians, whether they be against people with disabilities, whether they be against people who have the hide to actually use public transport. Tony Abbott, in his book Battle Lines, outlined this prejudice, where he said essentially that in the private motor vehicle, the master, the driver, is king. And that justified a public transport cuts, where he said that simply in terms of public transport, there aren't enough people who want to go from one place to another at a particular time to defend that public transport investment. It's one thing for him to hold this rather bizarre view as a private citizen, or indeed even as a shadow minister as he was then. It's another thing for him to impose this view on the country as Prime Minister. It's not in tune with the needs of modern Australia, let alone the future. But the problem that we have is that Tony Abbott is stuck in the past. The bigger problem is that he wants the rest of Australia to go back there and keep him company. And that's what we'll see in tonight's budget. All of his reactionary right-wing extreme views imposed on the Australian public through this mean-spirited budget.